In the aftermath of the deadly shooting this week in Louisiana, the nation's attention once again on the subject of mental illness. Congressman Tim Murphy is a psychologist. He is also proposing an overhaul of how we as a nation address mental health and how families can help their loved ones who are dealing with mental health issues. The bill that he's proposing is called Helping Families in Mental Health Crisis Act. He tweeted this following the movie theater shooting, quote, "Preliminary reports, Lafayette shooting linked to history of mental illness. How many lives lost before we take action?" Thank you for being with me, sir.
Thank you.
All right, let's go through this. If a family knows their loved one has a mental health problem, what does your bill change?
Well, it allows families to get more involved. Right now, there's such things as HIPAA laws, privacy laws, which prevents families of the severely mentally ill from knowing anything at all. It also helps in cases where someone has a history of violence and hospitalization, where we encourage states to use something called assisted outpatient treatment. Many states have this on the books, like Louisiana, but they don't necessarily use it, where a judge can meet with someone on a weekly basis or some period and make sure they stay on their medication, they stay in treatment, and they monitor them. In a case such as this, where you have someone who did have a history of violence, had been involuntarily committed, we don't really know what kind of monitoring there was done afterwards, but that's the very thing we need with people who have a history of violence and severe mental illness.
There's a little bit of resistance to this from those that say, due to the privacy, the HIPAA laws, right, as you just mentioned, some critics say it would force someone to get treatment against their will. How do you address those critics, right, and sort of walk that line with personal responsibility, personal privacy?
Sure. Well, we're talking about a very small percentage of people. We're not going to go back to the days of the asylums where people were put away in large numbers. We don't want that. But we recognize that when we're talking about the rights of a patient, I like to emphasize their right to be treated, their right to be well. And what happens is, while we've emptied our asylums and psychiatric hospitals and reduced the number of beds so which we have critical shortage, we haven't gotten rid of those people. We just made them homeless. We put them in prison. We put them in emergency rooms, and now we have a suicide rate of some 40,000. And while we're talking about rights, what about the rights of those two young women in that movie theater who are dead? What about the rights of the children at Stanhook Elementary School who are dead? They have rights too, and we ought to be paying attention to them.
You, sir, have an A rating from the NRA. And I wonder if you could speak about whether you think there need to be any changes in gun laws in this country. Specifically the fact that this shooter was able to, it has become clear, legally purchase this firearm at a pawn shop despite not only a history of mental illness. He was institutionalized. His wife at the time had put a restraining order against him, saying she was so concerned about safety in the household that she had removed all guns from the house. Does that also need to be addressed? Do some things need to change on that front?
Well, many states actually have a law that says if you have an involuntary psychiatric commitment, then you cannot purchase a gun. You have to look at what it was in those states where he frequented. And also, if you have a history of violence, you also can't purchase a gun. Those are issues that states should review and look at. But the point is, it still doesn't address the issue, are we helping people with what's in their minds and not just paying attention to what's in their hands?
But what does that mean states should review and address, right? Because this is someone who had documented issues with violence, who was institutionalized, who legally bought a gun.
Well, I know in Pennsylvania, where I'm from, you're not allowed to have a gun if you have had an involuntary psychiatric hospitalization. We need to look and see in his case what that was and what the laws were, and what the laws are in Louisiana with regard to that. Most states have that. Most states have a situation where a psychiatrist, psychologist can make a determination the person is dangerous. What you need to dig into in this case is, how severe was he? What was his diagnosis? Did review it? Because what happens is we don't have enough psychiatric beds in hospitals, so hospitals are quick to just dump a person back on the street, not have a treatment plan, not pay attention to that, and so therefore none of that is put on the record. And another thing is, many times states will have records, but they will not release it. There was a couple years ago, we had 2.5 million records of those with severe mental illness that was never put into the database so they could still purchase a gun because that data never got there. And states need to make sure they're releasing that data.
So much to unpack here, so much more to talk about. Please come on and join me again, sir. Thank you very much.
I'll be glad to. Take care.
Well, New York's